This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one website platform for entrepreneurs to stand out and succeed online. So, the new Withering Heights trailer by Emerald Fennell just launched, and it's erotica, to say the least. There is no subtlety about that. You know, even the poster art for the film itself is just screaming Harlequin romance novel vibes. And what's funny is, but not surprising, people are really upset about it. I mean, people have been upset about this since the beginning. You know, first there was the casting choices. We had Jacob Elordi as Heathcliff and Margot Robbie as Kathy, and people have some opinions on it, mainly on Jacob. You know, Heathcliff is renowned in the book for being dark-haired, dark-eyed and dark-skinned, which usually implies that he may have been a Roma background or some kind of ethnic background, and I think a lot of people had their hopes on potentially someone taking up the torch and giving it to Dev Patel, because we all love seeing Dev Patel in period costume and everyone adores him, but he was given to Elordi, which people are like, he's just like all the other Heathcliffs, of which has ignored the source material. And then you obviously had Margot Robbie, who is stunning, blonde-haired, blue-eyed beauty, who's not exactly giving Kathy, like, yes, Kathy is beautiful, but she's an 18-year-old late 18th century Yorkshire lass, usually normally implied with dark hair as well, so there's something quite anachronistic about Margot, in all elements, not just the wedding dress, which threw people. Like, the internet went into a frenzy when they saw Margot Robbie in that anachronistic white wedding dress in the Yorkshire moors, but you know... And obviously I don't think the director really did herself any favours, because when she, you know, responded to people criticising her casting choices, she sort of went, well, I don't need to listen to the source material anyway, it's just a book, quote unquote. And that got people really upset. I mean, what did you expect? You can't just say that, really, without expecting backlash. Warning, I'm about to deviate heavily from Withering Heights, but the conversation I'm about to have now is actually really relevant because it's going to come back on you at the end of the discussion of Withering Heights, which is why I'm bringing in the discussion now. But before we get into more of the controversial takes on everything happening today, I'd like to take a moment to thank today's sponsor, which is Squarespace. Whether you are just starting out or managing a growing brand, Squarespace makes it so easy for you to create beautiful websites, engage with your audience, and sell anything from products to content to time all in one place and all on your terms. I'm going through a real weird phase at the moment because my writing workshops didn't do very well, so I'm having to like reconfigure how I organise my whole business, but Squarespace thankfully has been there with me since the beginning when I was, in my early 20s. They've seen all the iterations of my online persona. But my Squarespace website allows for me to play with what I offer for like members only content, whether that's blogs or videos or workshops or monthly meetups. And that can be anything from, you know, a one-time fee to a subscription fee. It's really easy to set up on Squarespace. And then when it comes to evolving my business, which I've already employed because that thing didn't do very well, Squarespace's built-in analytics tools allows me to analyse where my content does well, website traffic, or where to focus my engagement. And another thing that's really important with Squarespace is it allows you to track your revenue, so whether that's bookings or purchases for products or invoices or even donations, all in one place. So if that sounds interesting to you, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and then when you're ready to launch your website, go to squarespace.com/Lady of the Library to save 10% of your first purchase of a website or domain. But I'm here not to defend choices, because I have my takes on everything, but I think what people will find really unexpected about me, particularly as someone who's like very, you know, adamant about historical accuracy. I mean, I've talked a lot about historical accuracy. However, I'm actually a big advocate for innovative, creative, or anachronistic or unusual casting choices in film and television and plays and theatre, because I'm from an acting background and I love studying plays and film in of their own right as their own artistic choices, separate from potentially a source medium. So I'm actually a big fan of diverse casting and unexpected casting, which again really upsets a lot of people, because particularly in the classics world and the ancient history world, they're really eager to be angry when things don't abide by historical accuracy. And I think there's a line that can be towed, so allow me to elaborate my thoughts. See, actually, my only real concern when it comes to artistic directors, creators, producers, and things like that altering, not, I mean, you can use facts as a terminology, but it's not always necessarily fact-based here. What I'm more concerned about is if the changes take away from underrepresented or marginalised or under-discussed areas of history, culture, societies, sex, races, religions. So that's what I'm more critical of. I'm like, are these creative choices taking away from something which has been historically ignored, suppressed, whitewashed, alienated, and so forth? Because not all changes do that. Some can be artistic choices, and therefore when I look at someone, I'm like, oh, are they, employing artistic license or making a choice? Then that's where I become more, analytical, to say the least. What I will say here is that there's obviously a lot of discussions when it comes to casting choices, and terms whitewashing and blackwashing have been employed, and usually by certain people, I think unjustly, as level players. I wouldn't argue that, even though I don't really agree that blackwashing has become a term coined by theorists in the field, we're just going to employ it for this exact purposes. To say whitewashing and blackwashing in this case are of equal systems is intellectually dishonest, because one existed as part of a systemic hierarchy which involved exclusion and abiding by white beauty standards, where the other, blackwashing in this case, is a reactive response to the former. So they, by that just time difference alone, they are not of equal players in this field. One does not have a history of social and systemic exclusion of another, so we can't really say that they are of equal of equal discussion points in this field. So when there are significant changes from a source material or historic material in some cases, I would ask myself, is this artistic expression and creative license being employed? And in order for me to identify if that is what the case is in this case, I would argue, well, okay, does the inclusion of this character in this way change how the character is perceived in an interesting way that would offer avenues for intellectual exploration or analytical thought? Does it create an inverse narrative? In some cases that can do. Does changes to characters actually amplify certain elements about a character that has been previously ignored, or parts of a storyline that has been previously ignored or othered? Because there is always a way for creatives and artistic directors to employ differences in casting choices which actually heightens the story in some way, or horrifies the audience in some way, or brings to light something which the audience has, kind of like pushed to the back of their heads and not wanted to think about directly until they've had an inversion of what has been presented to them visually. So I always ask, does the film do that? Or are their casting choices merely, regurgitating and reinforcing the foundations of white beauty standards and exclusion which has been present in Hollywood and visual aestheticism for centuries? That's how I kind of evaluate choices being made. Or is it just to sell tickets? Just something that's not really artistic, something that's kind of, based in greed or capitalism, or just, horrible systemic hierarchies that are boring at this point in life. So that's how I evaluate artistic choices, particularly when it comes to creators, which is also why I really loved and was really excited by the casting choice of Jodie Turner-Smith as Anne Boleyn, which I think was a few years ago now. I can't really particularly remember, but I thought that was so cool. And here I'm going to come to the people who are like, but it's historical accuracy. Wait, we'll get to that argument. But for me, I was like, it's acting, it's film. I've been to many a Shakespeare play with all black casts, or all Asian casts. I went and saw the most fantastic production of the Trojan Women that was all done in Korean. I think it was last year. That was probably the best production I've ever seen. None of the Trojan Women were Korean, and they didn't speak in Korean, but there they were. It was the most amazing production, and you can add so much from a film perspective or from a theoretical perspective in general. If you're analysing a text or a scene or a film or television, these changes can then completely convert how you want to interpret the story and what you get out of a story and what angles the story can be read at from a theoretical perspective. Really exciting, and makes the text, like the life of the text becomes renewed, in my opinion. But here's my comeback to the people who go, but it's not historically accurate, they're erasing history, they are lying about history, and they are not educating people correctly about history, and people won't be educated anymore. Well, one, my first come back to that is that if you are relying on popular media to educate yourself or your children, do a better job. Like, really, don't rely on popular media to spoon feed you your education and information like a toddler. Read books, for crying out loud. And two, I would say, quite evidently, that the casting choices of like Anne Boleyn with Jodie Turner-Smith is not confusing to anyone with an IQ of over 20, and that includes little baby children who also learn from a very young age about history. And even if it was confusing, the topic is actually really easily amendable and actually beneficial, because the conversation would go like this. Daddy, I didn't know Anne Boleyn was a black woman. Oh, well, no, darling, she's not a black woman. She was actually a white woman, but this is played by a black actress because she's incredibly talented and she's good at playing the character. However, if you are interested, we can go to the library and you can learn all about Anne Boleyn and Tudor history in England if you really want to. Now, that could have happened, but the vast majority of people did not engage with the conversation that way. Instead, they spewed hate and virality and racial slurs on Twitter, claiming that they're trying to erase white history and miseducate their children, and their children are going to be dumber. Meanwhile, their child is just sitting on the sofa taking selfies of themselves and scrolling for hours on Instagram or Snapchat with their friends and learned nothing about Tudor history or Anne Boleyn, but they know that Anne Boleyn was a white woman, and let's face it, the chances are they already knew Anne Boleyn was a white woman, but the reinforcement of saying Anne Boleyn was a white woman makes them incredibly intelligent, apparently. So yes, this is why I always say, do not rely on popular media, even documentaries, quote-unquote documentaries. Dramatisation of any historical period, whether that's on television or in a movie or as part of a documentary, is not there to technically educate people. It is there to entertain people. It is entertainment first and foremost, rather than educational content. It is there to inspire people to want to learn more about the topic rather than rely on purely documentaries and dramatisations of historical periods to educate people on a topic. You're meant to go away and learn about it, not rely on that information, because it's entertainment at the end of the day. It's more like sexy and entertaining in some way, but the facts aren't as sexy and entertaining. You know, reading the Peloponnesian War isn't as interesting as watching a film about the Peloponnesian War, but still, it's actually worth reading about the Peloponnesian War. And I say this as someone who loves to nitpick a historical inaccuracy in a film, because that's fun. It's fun. When you see llamas in the back of Troy, that's hilarious. That's so interesting to look at. I suppose where the frustration is that I think a lot of historians will go, well, I would love to have the money to create a film about this topic that I'm really passionate about, and someone else got that money and they kind of messed it up. But at the end of the day, that's the reason they're classicists or historians working their desk jobs, and that's why those people are producers and directors. It's because they don't care about the nitpicking of things. They want to make things sexy and entertaining and interesting, and those films and documentaries or, you know, documentary dramas are there to inspire people to go and learn about the things that these people care more about. You know, I'd argue most historians got into their topic because they watched something as a child, whether that was Ray Harryhausen's films, which again are not historically accurate, or Hercules. And here's my actual main argument for casting people like Turner-Smith as Anne Boleyn, is because a lot of it's seen as only white person history, and it's kind of exclusionary in that sense. But if people see themselves in a film, maybe that's a little child who sees herself as the Little Mermaid, or even as Anne Boleyn, she knows historically that that wasn't possible back then. But now, because she relates to it in some way, she may actually be inspired to go and read about Tudor England, because seeing that wonderful black actress play Anne Boleyn got her interested in reading about Tudor England. That's my main argument for why I don't care if there's diversity that's anachronistic in casting or even historical inaccuracies, because I think the entertainment version of it inspires people to go and learn about the reality of it. And if that doesn't, and it just gets people angry, all they end up doing is bitching about it on Twitter, and their children and themselves don't actually learn anything more about it, but they think they're really intelligent by going, well, I think Anne Boleyn was a white woman actually, rather than actually going and learn and be inspired by anything. I can guarantee everyone knows Anne Boleyn was a white woman. From the age of 4, you learned that. You know what the kings and queens of England looked like up until the 21st century. It's not exactly rocket science. So yes, that seems like a big deviation from Wuthering Heights, but I promise you, as I said earlier, it's relevant to the rest of this discussion. So let's go back to Wuthering Heights. Technically, she is correct. It is just a book. It is entirely fictional. The only problem is, I would argue that it's a shame. I mean, going back to my perspective earlier about if it's creative license being employed or not. When it comes to Heathcliff, it's just a shame. You know, Jacob Elordi isn't adding any kind of commentary or, you know, intellectual intrigue to his casting to the character of Heathcliff that the other like dozen white Heathcliffs haven't already added to the discussion beforehand. It just seems to be a perpetuation of this is a handsome, dark, brooding man, which in this instance, in this version of Wuthering Heights, is actually really a shame, because it also reinforces that unconscious but very prevalent belief that erotic storytelling is reserved entirely for the Barbie and Kens of the world, literally in this case. So it was a missed opportunity, in my opinion, because we've learned, particularly from Bridgerton, directors and producers should know better by now, that the audiences and viewers are very welcoming to diverse sex symbols in film and TV, particularly in period costume. They are very, 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 very welcoming of that, so therefore it was a missed opportunity on all fronts, I believe. And then we get on to the erotic element of the Wuthering Heights story, because I think a lot of people, particularly if you're very familiar with the text, may feel uncomfortable with the further perpetuation of this as a good romantic story. I remember being a teenager at school, and when some of my classmates were reading it for A-level, they were like, oh, I want a Heathcliff. And I was like, really? Really, you want a Heathcliff, this violent, toxic man with coercive control, emotional abuse and physical violence, and also potentially a rapist? You really want that man as your love interest? There was like a really weird skewed perspective and perception of Heathcliff, which has only gone on to be reinforced as an erotic ideal, particularly in films such as this, because he's a horrible person. As 18-year-old me said in one of her first ever YouTube video essays, and I quote,
Heathcliff and Catherine, in my opinion, are two of the most detestable characters in literature. I mean, I've never been more happy to see them die.
So again, this toxic relationship, this toxic dynamic seems to be troubling to eroticize once again and normalise as something that is like sexually enticing to both genders. I mean, I as a teenager found the whole novel pretty uncomfortable to read. She's brilliant at prose. It's some of the best prose ever written, which is why it exists to this day, but I never had the urge to watch it enacted out in front of me, that's for sure. And obviously, potentially, she's leaning in on the eroticisation of the story because of the fact that Cathy and Heathcliff in the book never do have sex. They are entirely bound by just holding hands and kissing, but they never go further than that. So she's clearly leaning in on that and inverting a sexual tension into the story, which isn't explicit in the text itself. Potentially there was, because obviously he's kind of obsessive and crazy. Both of them are in their own way, and I use crazy lightly and fondly, but still, it's not a comfortable read. They are, so to convert that into sexual passion, there's probably a lot of problematic issues with that. But I think a lot of people are just sad because they see it as the bastardization of a text of which they are protective. But that brings me back to my previous thought about the historical accuracy argument that I had earlier. Because, like, notably the title of the film, Wuthering Heights, is in quotation marks. It implies that it's just a fun prod to the idea that this is erotic fan fiction of a novel rather than the novel itself. And I think Fennell is, marketing off the trend that we have seen in, the popularity of erotic period drama and just taking on the text. And I wouldn't be surprised that if this does well, we wouldn't see iterations of Jane Eyre, erotic Jane Eyre, or, erotic Pride and Prejudice following suit. And this is where the conversation returns to my previous talk. I think people are scared about the bastardization of this book because they have that same kind of innate fear that this film will erase the novel, in the same way people who are protective of Anne Boleyn being played by a white woman only are afraid that history is going to be erased. And both, I would argue, are entirely unfounded fears. Having actors or actresses of different racial backgrounds, or having physical disabilities, like visible disabilities on screen, of historical figures or real life figures who did not present the same external appearance in that way, does not erase the historical reality. In the same way, having an erotic version of Wuthering Heights in film does not erase the text itself. If someone's first interaction with Wuthering Heights as a text is via this erotic film, which may happen to a lot of people, they're going to have a shock if they go to the original text. In the same way, a lot of people love and have fondness for reimaginings of source material. You know, a lot of people love the film Troy, even though it's very different from the Iliad. A lot of people love, you know, remakes of the Odyssey, such as O Brother, Where Art Thou? You know, remakes have been a thing for a long time. It doesn't take away the text's existence. It doesn't take away the historical weight of the text. It doesn't take away the analytical, you know, breadth of the text. It just merely introduces the text in a new way that isn't that offensive, really, because the text can't be offended, and Bronte is dead, as she has been for a very long time. So it always feels bonkers to me that people get offended as if remakes or any kind of entertainment media is altering, changing history, changing reality, changing the text. It's just such a bonkers argument to me. It's just so emotionally charged rather than rationally thought that things can exist in different formats and appeal to different audiences, and would actually technically introduce new audiences to the original sources, whether that's history or the text itself. So I'm not going to watch the Wuthering Heights film, primarily because it's not my forte. I don't really particularly like seeing sex scenes in books when I'm reading, let alone a whole film dedicated to it. I'm not the target audience for that, but I don't think that's what she's going for. She's not making the target audience for the original readers of Wuthering Heights, unless they're people who are like, actually, hell yes, I want to see a fan fiction version of this, because basically that's what it is. And fan fiction has existed for centuries and centuries. Retellings have existed, and you know, if you don't like it, don't give your money to it, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did well and we saw like erotic Pride and Prejudice and erotic Jane Eyre. Disastrous. I feel like it would be disastrous, but that's my personal opinion. Unless you just want to go to an audience and nitpick things for fun. But yes, that's my video discussing the controversies of changes in films, because I'm not that bothered by it. I'm really not that bothered by it at all. I think actors are actors doing their thing, so I don't see why people get really butthurt about stating the obvious. They're like, did you know that person wasn't like that in history? Yes, 3-year-olds learn that. It's really not hard, but maybe it doesn't matter, because you shouldn't be using popular media to educate yourself or your children. You should be using it as a gateway for education rather than relying on it, because it's sort of it's not like you're going to a lecture at university and they say a lie in front of the class, going, this is a historically accurate Anne Boleyn. No one would say that. And whilst I know, unfortunately, that trust has been done by misinformation, AI, technology, fake news, which ironically produced by the person who says fake news the most, this idea that truth cannot be deciphered. Again, if anything, stop relying on popular media to teach you, and that includes social media to teach people. Rely on peer-reviewed literature, library texts, peer-reviewed journal articles. These things are technically accessible. Entertainment is primarily and foremost entertainment, and I don't think entertainment can change how history is perceived unless people are happy to be willfully gullible and just accept things as they are told. It's funny that the people who get upset about things like, you know, Taylor Smith being made Anne Boleyn are usually the same ones who will eat something else up as told by a deeply untrustworthy source. As if like, you can't trick me. So no one's trying to trick you, my love. It's entirely artistic expression. It's just someone doing their job. But perhaps you should raise your suspicions elsewhere, because it may be beneficial that you don't consume and trust everything that is fed to you all the time, and take the volition to do the work yourself. And that's my argument for today. But thank you so much for watching, and thank you as always to my wonderful Patreons. Oh, we've got more librarians. Thank you so much for joining. I have Eat Your Vegetables, I have Ashley Nicole, I have Yvonne and Yvonne, I have Cody Martin, Jenny Edevade, Eric Taylor, Marina, Psycho Teddy, Wee Lauren, Andrea Bazil, and Nicholas Reed. Thank you all so much for being wonderful patrons, and join over on Patreon to see our book club of the month and all the little things that are released over on there. Thank you as always, and I hope you are happy and healthy, and remember, books save lives, so keep reading.